one normally associates the National Trust with stately homes and the countryside. But how have the National Trust been dragged into the centre of the culture wars? One campaign group, Restore Trust, is campaigning ahead of the National Trust annual general meeting and say they want the Trust to change and that their Trust focus and priorities should, quote, not be driven by modish, divisive ideologies. Well, joining us now to talk about this is Zewditu Gebreyohanes, Director of Restore Trust. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you just tell us a bit more about what Restore Trust do, what is the purpose of the organisation and what you're hoping to achieve?
Well, Restore Trust was founded last year to return the National Trust to what it's meant to be doing, which is essentially preserving this nation's built and natural heritage. And of course, it's been straying away from that. We saw one example of that with the slavery report, but we've also seen plenty of other examples, things like homes being closed to the public, partially closed sometimes, but sometimes also turned into holiday lets, or fields and forests, bits of forest being sold off. So ultimately, I think it's a commercialisation of the National Trust, and that's led to a whole host of issues.
What do you say to those within the National Trust who say that it seems sometimes to be a bit of an exclusive organisation? You can sort of stereotype the membership of the National Trust as a certain kind of person, and that they might want to expand their membership, try and bring in new people to the organisation, and that might be a motivation beside them trying to sort of reach out to different communities. Is that not a valid point?
I think it's always a valid point to try and bring new people in, and that's something that should be encouraged. But I think it's patronising when people think that the way to bring new people or new audiences in is by constantly, referring to slavery. If there is a link with a property to slavery, and it's very clear, and it was built on the proceeds of slavery, there's no problem in saying that. But it's when you then go into the slavery, when you focus just on the negative aspects of a property's history, I think that's when the problem comes. So it has to be balanced. It has to be written by historians rather than activists, because otherwise you get a skewed... it reflects the agenda of the person writing the report. The other thing I would say is that actually, if the National Trust really were genuinely concerned about inclusivity, there are ways to, you would first reduce the membership fees, for instance, which is completely out of the reach of people who are not well off, of any racial background. So it's important to note that actually there are lots of other ways the National Trust could be more inclusive before it even considers rewriting things.
And a lot of cultural institutions over the last few years have been subject to many of the complaints that you're raising. The Tate, the National Gallery. People are arguing that, for example, in a lot of the descriptions of works, that there's a lot of politicised narratives and it's skewed in various different directions. I mean, what do you think ordinary people can do? Because as far as I'm aware, Restore Trust tries to encourage more democratic participation in trying to shape the way that national institutions go. So tell us more about what your organisation does.
Well, we're trying to bring about change. From within. We of course are comprised of National Trust members and volunteers and people who are involved in the National Trust. We are part of the National Trust. So what we're trying to do is we've put forward 2 members' resolutions, which I can go into, and we've put forward 7 council candidates this year. So the council candidates, we hope, we know that they're brilliant, and they would not just rubber stamp decisions by the trustees, but they would scrutinise them. And so we'd encourage all National Trust members to vote for these 7 council candidates and for our 2 members' resolutions by the 28th of October, which is the deadline to vote.
And finally, what do you say to those who would say, this is a bit eccentric, we've got a cost of living crisis and, there's a leadership race. Is these the kinds of issues that we should be gaining attention for?
Well, the National Trust has over 5 million members. It's one of the biggest membership organisations in the world, and certainly in the country, and it really means a lot to many people. There are people who volunteer, it's there for the National Trust, and especially lots of elderly people, and this is a very important institution for them. There are people who go to National Trust properties all the time. So this does, it does make a difference. And the fact that the people at the very top of the National Trust are dictating an agenda which is against the wishes of the vast majority of members and volunteers, and that they are telling us this. People are writing into us, people are donating to us. It's very much something that's coming from within. So I think it shows that there is a desire for change.